Imagine slowly noticing that your emotional reactions no longer feel spontaneous. You pause before speaking, not because you were thoughtful, but because you were afraid of the response. You replay conversations in your head long after they end, analyzing every word, every tone. Wondering if you were wrong to feel the way you did. You feel guilty for wanting rest, space, or honesty. Nothing dramatic happened, no one shouted, no one threatened you. And yet, something inside you feels quietly restricted. This is how emotional control often begins, not with force, but with subtle influence that grows over time. Emotional control works best when it does not look like control at all. It often hides behind concern, logic, maturity, or care. The person using these tactics may genuinely believe they are being reasonable or helpful. They may appear calm while you feel increasingly unstable. That contrast is important. When one person appears grounded and the other feels confused, the confusion is often misinterpreted as weakness rather than a response to manipulation. One of the earliest foundations of emotional control is emotional invalidation. This happens when your feelings are acknowledged just enough to be dismissed. You express discomfort and are told you are too sensitive. You describe something that hurt you and are told it was not meant that way. You remember events clearly and are told your memory is unreliable. Over time, this creates a dangerous shift. You stop trusting your internal signals. You stop asking why something feels wrong and start assuming the problem must be you. Once self-trust weakens, control becomes easier to maintain. You begin seeking permission to feel certain emotions. You wait for reassurance before trusting your own reactions. Your emotional compass slowly recalibrates around someone else's perspective. This does not feel like obedience, it feels like caution, growth, or self-awareness. But the cost is that your emotional independence quietly erodes. Another powerful tactic is inconsistency. Approval, warmth, and validation are given unpredictably. One day, you are appreciated for something that earns criticism the next. The rules are never clear, and that uncertainty keeps you alert. Your mind becomes focused on monitoring moods, tone, and timing. Instead of expressing yourself naturally, you begin adjusting constantly. Emotional energy that could be used for growth gets redirected toward avoiding emotional loss. Guilt is often used instead of direct control. Rather than demanding compliance, the controller frames your needs as harm. If you set a boundary, you are told you are hurting them. If you prioritize yourself, you are framed as selfish. If you say no, you are made to feel like you are failing morally. Over time, guilt stops being situational and becomes automatic. You begin limiting yourself without being asked, because avoiding guilt feels safer than asserting yourself. Comparison quietly weakens self-worth. You may be compared to others, to an ideal version of yourself, or to an unspoken standard you can never quite reach. The comparison is rarely obvious or openly cruel. It is subtle, almost casual. But it plants doubt. When confidence weakens, reliance increases. Control thrives when validation comes from outside rather than within. Silence is one of the most powerful and least recognized tactics. Withdrawal of communication, affection, or emotional engagement sends a strong signal without a single word. The lack of response creates anxiety and uncertainty. Humans are wired to seek connection, and when it disappears suddenly, the brain interprets it as danger. The person experiencing this silence often responds by apologizing, explaining, or changing behavior, without ever being told to do so. Authority framing reinforces emotional imbalance. The controller positions themselves as more logical, mature, or emotionally stable. Your feelings are treated as overreactions, while theirs are presented as objective truth. Over time, you may begin filtering your emotions before they even surface, anticipating dismissal or correction. Self-expression becomes self-editing. What makes emotional control especially dangerous is how gradual it is. There is rarely a clear starting point. Instead, small shifts accumulate, boundaries move slightly. Doubt grows quietly. What once felt uncomfortable begins to feel normal. By the time the pattern becomes visible, it feels deeply embedded in daily interaction. It is important to understand that emotional control is not always intentional. Many people repeat behaviors learned in environments where control was mistaken for care, but intention does not change impact. Emotional control, whether deliberate or unconscious, shapes behavior, perception, and self-worth over time. One of the clearest signs of emotional control is persistent confusion. When you feel consistently unsure of yourself, when clarity returns only when you are alone or away from someone's influence. That is not coincidence. Healthy relationships do not require constant self-monitoring. They do not punish boundaries, they do not rely on guilt, fear, or uncertainty to maintain connection. Awareness is the first step out of emotional control. Patterns matter more than isolated moments. How you feel over time matters more than how things appear from the outside. Calm behavior is not always safe behavior. Confidence is not always correctness, and silence is not always peace. Emotional influence becomes control when your feelings stop being treated as meaningful signals and start being treated as obstacles. When you manage yourself primarily to avoid emotional consequences imposed by someone else, autonomy begins to slip away. Understanding these tactics is not about assigning blame, it is about reclaiming clarity. When emotions are respected, they strengthen identity and connection. When emotions are controlled, they slowly erode both. If this explanation helped you recognize patterns you haven't fully named before, take a moment to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts in the comments.